My name is Eudora Bellamy. I am 76 years old. And the day they blamed me for everything, they stood in my own living room and said it like I was nothing. Before I tell you how it happened, listen to me closely. Because the moment my own family pointed their fingers at me, the moment they said I ruined their lives, the moment they thanked everyone else but me, that moment broke something in me. But it also woke something up. Before we go any further, if you love real, emotional stories like this, please subscribe to this channel. Like this video, turn on your notification bell so you don't miss powerful stories like mine. And tell me in the comments, what part of the country are you watching from? I want to know who is sitting with me today. Now listen. They blamed me for everything. And thanked me for nothing. It happened on a Sunday afternoon. The kind of Sunday that feels slow and heavy. The house was full, but my heart already felt tired. My children were there. My grandchildren, too. Voices filled the room, but no one was talking to me. I sat in my chair by the window, the same chair I had used for years, watching people walk around like I was part of the furniture. Then my son stood up. He cleared his throat. "Since everyone is here," he said, "we need to talk." I felt it in my chest before the words even came. Something was wrong. My daughter folded her arms. My other son leaned against the wall. Nobody looked at me. That was the first thing that hurt. Then my son said it. "Mama, everything that went wrong in this family started with you." The room went quiet. My ears rang. I laughed at first, because my mind refused to accept what my heart already knew. "What?" I asked softly. He sighed, like he was tired of carrying a burden. "You were too strict, too controlling. You scared us. You pushed Daddy away. You made life hard." My daughter nodded. "If you had been different," she said, "maybe things would have turned out better for all of us." I looked around the room. These were the children I raised, the ones I fed with empty pockets, the ones I stayed up all night praying for, the ones I protected with my own body when life got rough. And they were blaming me. I opened my mouth to speak, but my voice wouldn't come out. Then my son added the words that still echo in my head. "We survived in spite of you, not because of you." That was the moment. The exact moment. They blamed me for everything. And not one of them said thank you. But what they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that this was only the beginning. Because the truth they were avoiding was about to surface. Let me take you back. I was not always this old woman sitting by a window. Once I was young, strong, hopeful. I married their father when I was barely 20. I believed love would save us. I believed family meant safety. I was wrong. Their father drank. He shouted. He disappeared for days. When he came back, he brought anger with him. I stayed. I stayed because I thought children needed both parents. I stayed because I believed things would change. I stayed because leaving felt like failure. But one night, after he threw a chair across the room and my children cried in fear, I made a choice. I took them and left. No money, no plan, just my children and my courage. From that day on, everything became my responsibility. Bills, food, school, safety. And blame. When money was tight, they blamed me for not having enough. When they struggled in school, teachers blamed me for not doing more. When their father disappeared completely, people blamed me for breaking the family. I carried it all. Quietly. I worked until my hands ached. I cleaned houses. I cooked food that stretched too far. I went to bed hungry so my children could eat. I never once said, "Look at what I did." I thought love didn't need applause. I was wrong. As my children grew older, the blaming changed shape. When my daughter failed a class, it was because I didn't push her the right way. When my son lost his job, it was because I raised him wrong. When their marriages struggled, somehow it traced back to me. "You didn't show us love properly," they said. "You were always angry," they said. "You were too tired," they said. Yes. I was tired, because I was carrying everyone. Still, I stayed quiet, because mothers are taught to swallow blame like medicine. Years passed. My body grew weaker, but my responsibilities did not. My children moved back in and out of my house like it was a bus stop. They brought their problems, their laundry, their anger. They blamed me when things went wrong. And when things went right, they thanked God. They thanked their friends. They thanked luck. But never me. I told myself it didn't matter. That love was enough. But love without appreciation turns into pain. Slow pain. The kind that sits in your bones. The Sunday they confronted me did not come out of nowhere. Looking back, I can see the signs. The whispering when I entered a room. The way they spoke about decisions without including me. The way they treated my home like it belonged to them. Still, I never expected them to say it out loud. To blame me. To strip me of every sacrifice with one sentence. As my son finished talking, I felt my hands shaking in my lap. I finally found my voice. "So everything wrong in your life is my fault?" I asked. He shrugged. "We're just being honest." Honest. That word felt like a knife. I looked at my daughter. "And you?" I asked. She looked away. "I think you did the best you could," she said slowly, "but your best wasn't enough." That was worse than anger. That was dismissal. My chest hurt, my vision blurred. I wanted to scream, but instead I nodded. "I see," I whispered. They went back to talking, about plans, about the future, about moving forward. Without me. Like I had already served my purpose. Like I was done. They thanked each other for being strong, for breaking cycles, for surviving. I sat there, invisible. When they finally left that evening, my house felt colder than ever. I stayed in my chair long after the door closed. And that was when I realized something terrifying. They had been blaming me for years. I had just finally heard it. But what I had not seen yet, what they were hiding from me, was the real reason they needed me to carry all the blame. And when I discovered that reason, everything would change. That night after they left, I did not turn on the lights. I sat in the dark, still in the same chair by the window, my hands resting on my knees like they had nowhere else to go. The house was quiet, but my head was loud. Their voices kept replaying in my mind, over and over, like a song I could not turn off. "You ruined everything. We survived in spite of you. Your best wasn't enough." I had heard blame before. All my life, blame followed me like a shadow. But hearing it spoken so clearly, so calmly by my own children, that did something different to me. It settled deep. I went to bed late, but sleep did not come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces, not as children, but as grown adults pointing at me like I was the problem they needed to get rid of. Around dawn, I finally drifted into a light sleep, and when I woke, my pillow was damp. I did not remember crying. I got up slowly and made my way to the kitchen. My joints ached more than usual, but I welcomed the pain. It reminded me that I was still here, still alive, still breathing, even after everything they said. I made myself tea and sat at the table alone. For years, this table had been full. Plates, voices, arguments, laughter that sometimes felt forced. Now it was just me. And for the first time, I asked myself a question I had never allowed before. What if they were wrong? Not about everything. I knew I was not perfect. I knew I made mistakes. I had raised my voice sometimes. I had been strict. I had been tired. I had been afraid. But what if I was not the monster they were making me out to be? That thought felt dangerous, almost selfish. So I pushed it away. Instead, I did what I had always done. I blamed myself. I replayed every moment I could remember, searching for proof. Proof that I failed them. Proof that I deserved their anger. Proof that all my sacrifices had somehow damaged them instead of saving them. By midday, my head hurt. I decided to step outside for air. The sun was bright, almost rude in how normal it looked. Birds chirped. A neighbor waved at me. Life went on, unaware that my heart felt like it had been turned inside out. I walked slowly down the street, my thoughts drifting back to when my children were small. I remembered holding my daughter's hand on her first day of school. She had been scared, squeezing my fingers so tight it hurt. I remembered telling her, "I'm right here. I won't let anything happen to you." I remembered my son waking up from nightmares, crying for me in the middle of the night. I would sit by his bed, rubbing his back until he fell asleep again. Was that ruining them? I remembered the nights I skipped meals, the times I wore the same coat through winters because there was no money for a new one, the days I worked until my legs shook, then came home and cooked anyway. Was that not enough? As I walked, something else began to bother me. The way they had spoken on Sunday did not sound new. It sounded practiced, like they had talked about this before, like they had agreed on the story they wanted to tell. That thought followed me home. I went into my bedroom and opened the small drawer where I kept old papers, birth certificates, letters, documents I had signed years ago without really reading because I trusted the people around me. I sat on the bed and began going through them slowly. That was when I noticed it. A letter I did not remember receiving. It was folded neatly, tucked between two old bills. The date on it was from months ago. My name was typed at the top. My heart began to beat faster as I read. It talked about family decisions, about moving forward, about responsibility. The words felt cold and distant, like they were written by someone who did not know me at all. At the bottom were signatures. Not mine. My children's. My hands started to shake. Why would they be signing anything without me? I read the letter again, more carefully this time. Certain lines stood out now. Due to concerns. In light of ongoing issues. For everyone's well-being. Concerns about what? Issues according to who? I sat there for a long time, the letter resting in my lap, my mind racing. They did not just blame me on Sunday. They had been building a case. That afternoon, my daughter called. Her voice was soft, almost sweet, like nothing had happened. "Mama, are you okay?" she asked. I swallowed. "I'm fine." There was a pause. "We didn't mean to hurt you yesterday." "But you did," I said quietly. Another pause, longer this time. "We just think it's time to be honest," she said. Honest. That word again. "I found a letter," I said. Her breath caught, just for a second. "What letter?" she asked quickly. The way she said it told me everything. "One with your signature on it," I replied, "and your brother's." Silence. Then she sighed. "Mama, you weren't supposed to see that yet." Yet. The word made my chest tighten. "See what?" I asked. She lowered her voice. "We were just trying to make plans, in case things get worse." "Worse how?" I asked. "Well," she said carefully, "you've been different, forgetful, emotional." I almost laughed. "You blamed me for being tired," I said. "Now you're blaming me for aging." She did not answer. "Why didn't you talk to me?" I asked. She sounded frustrated now. "Because every time we try, you make it about yourself." That hurt more than the blame. I ended the call before my voice could break. That evening, my son came by. He did not hug me. He did not sit down. He stood in the middle of the living room, like he was inspecting something. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he said. "I didn't start this," I replied. He shook his head. "You always say that." I held up the letter. "Explain this." He glanced at it and shrugged. "It's just paperwork." "Paperwork that talks about me like I'm a problem," I said. He sighed, rubbing his face. "Mama, you don't see what we see." "And what is that?" I asked. "That you've always been the reason things felt heavy," he said. "We're just finally saying it out loud." There it was again. Blame. Not one thank you. Not one moment of acknowledgement. Just blame. After he left, I locked the door and leaned against it, my heart pounding. I slid down until I was sitting on the floor, my back against the wood. For the first time in my life, I felt something dangerous rising inside me. Not anger. Not sadness. Doubt. Not doubt in myself. Doubt in them. I began to wonder why they needed me to carry all the blame. What were they protecting? What story were they trying to sell, and who were they selling it to? That night, I barely slept. In the early hours of the morning, I made a decision. I would stop explaining myself. I would stop apologizing for surviving. I would start listening, not to their words but to their actions. Because one thing was clear now. They were blaming me for everything. So they would never have to thank me for what I had really done. And whatever they were hiding behind that blame. I was getting closer to it. That realization settled heavy in my chest as the sun began to rise. And I knew one thing for sure. The truth was coming. And when it did, none of us would be able to pretend anymore. Before I continue this story, kindly subscribe, like, turn on the bell, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. The next morning, I woke up with a strange feeling in my chest. Not pain. Not fear. Awareness. The kind that comes when something you have ignored for years finally stands up in front of you and refuses to be unseen. I made my bed slowly and stood by the window for a long time, watching the street wake up. Children walked past with backpacks. Cars started. Life moved forward like nothing had happened. But inside me, something had shifted. I was done defending myself. I was done explaining my life to people who never listened. I decided to test something. I decided to stop fixing things. That day, I did not call anyone first. I did not apologize. I did not check on my children. I waited. And the silence that followed told me more than words ever could. By afternoon, my daughter called. "Mama, did you forget to pay the bill?" she asked. No greeting, no concern, just a task. "No," I said calmly. "I didn't forget." There was a pause. "So, you're going to pay it today, right?" I looked at the phone in my hand and realized something sharp and clear. They blamed me when things went wrong. They depended on me when things needed fixing. "I'm not paying it today," I said. Another pause, longer this time. "What do you mean?" she asked. "I mean," I replied, "I'm not doing it today." Her voice tightened. "Why?" I thought about all the years I never asked why, all the things I did without question. "I'm tired," I said. She laughed a little, like she thought I was joking. "Mama, don't start." "Start what?" I asked. "This," she said, acting like a victim. That word again. Victim. I ended the call. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from shock. Shock at how quickly she turned on me the moment I stopped being useful. An hour later, my son showed up. He didn't knock. He never knocked anymore. "You didn't pay the bill," he said. I sat in my chair and looked at him. "I know." He stared at me like I had broken some unspoken rule. "Why not?" "Because you said everything wrong in your life is my fault," I said quietly. "So I thought you might want to handle this one." He scoffed. "That's not what we meant." "What did you mean?" I asked. He opened his mouth, then closed it. He walked around the room, packing. "You're being petty." "No," I said. "I'm being still." He stopped and looked at me, really looked at me, like he was seeing a stranger. "This isn't you," he said. I nodded. "You're right." That unsettled him. He left angry, slamming the door behind him. That night, I did not cry. Instead, I started noticing things. The next day, I let another small thing go undone, then another. And every time I did, one of my children showed up angry, confused, or annoyed. Not worried. Annoyed. They were not scared for me. They were scared for themselves. That's when it hit me. They blamed me not because I failed them, but because blaming me kept me busy fixing things. Blame kept me small. Blame kept me tired. Blame kept them comfortable. Once I stopped carrying it, everything began to wobble. A few days later, I went to church early and sat alone in the back pew. I didn't tell anyone why I was there. I just needed quiet. After service, an old friend named Ruth sat beside me. "You look lighter," she said. I almost laughed. "I stopped explaining," I replied. She nodded slowly, like she understood more than I had said. That afternoon, I found another document. This one was newer. It was tucked inside a folder my son had once insisted on organizing for me. I remembered trusting him, thinking he was helping. The paper talked about decisions made in the best interest of the family. My name was mentioned. But again, no signature from me. Just theirs. My heart pounded as I read. This wasn't about hurt feelings. This wasn't about blame alone. This was about control. They needed me to look like the problem. Because if I wasn't the problem, then they were. That evening, my daughter came by again. This time, she brought my grandchildren. She smiled too much. "See," she said loudly, "we're all still family." I watched my grandchildren run around the house, touching things, laughing, unaware of the weight sitting in the room. She leaned in and whispered, "You're making things uncomfortable." I whispered back, "You made them dishonest." Her smile disappeared. She pulled me aside into the kitchen. "You need to stop," she said. "People are starting to ask questions." "About what?" I asked. "About you," she said. "About us." I looked at her and felt something deep and sad settle in my chest. "Good," I said. Her eyes widened. "You don't understand what you're doing." "I understand exactly," I replied. "You blamed me for everything so no one would look closer." She stared at me in silence. Then she said something that confirmed everything. "We did what we had to do." I felt my heart drop. "To protect what?" I asked. She didn't answer. She gathered the children and left. That night, I sat alone and stared at the wall. I realized something painful but freeing. They did not want my forgiveness. They wanted my silence. And I was done giving it. I reached for my notebook and began writing everything down. Dates, conversations, words, documents. Not to attack. Not to punish. But to remember. Because people who rewrite you rely on you forgetting. As I closed the notebook, my phone buzzed. A message from my son. "You're pushing us away." I stared at the screen and whispered to the empty room. "No, you pushed me under." And for the first time since they blamed me for everything, I knew the truth was no longer buried. It was breathing. And soon, it would speak for itself. Before I continue this story, kindly subscribe, like, turn on the bell, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. That night, I dreamed I was standing in my old kitchen, back when my children were still small. The stove was on, pots boiling, and everyone was calling my name at the same time. My daughter wanted help with her homework. My son was crying because he couldn't find his shoes. The phone was ringing. The doorbell was ringing. Someone was knocking on the back door, too. I kept turning in circles, trying to answer everyone. And then someone said, very calmly, "Why are you like this?" I woke up with my heart racing. For a long time, I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the house breathe. I realized something then that hurt more than the blame itself. They had always needed me overwhelmed. Because when I was overwhelmed, I never asked questions. I got out of bed and went to the kitchen. As I made tea, I noticed how quiet everything felt. No one asking, no one demanding, no one blaming me for something that hadn't even happened yet. The quiet felt strange, almost wrong. That's how used I was to carrying noise. Later that morning, my son called again. His voice was sharper this time. "Mama, why are people calling me?" I said nothing. Why are they asking questions about you? He pressed. I took a slow breath. Maybe because they're hearing more than one side now. That's not fair, he snapped. I almost laughed. Fair, I said softly. You blamed me in front of everyone. Was that fair? There was silence on the line. Then he said, You're embarrassing us. I closed my eyes. You embarrassed yourselves the day you said I was the reason your lives were broken. He hung up on me. I set the phone down gently, like it was something fragile, and realized my hands were not shaking. That surprised me. The next few days, I noticed things I had never allowed myself to see before. How my children only checked on me when they needed something. How concern always came wrapped in control. How blame followed right behind every favor. I stopped volunteering information. I stopped rushing to explain. I answered questions simply and truthfully. And every time I did, they grew more uncomfortable. My daughter came by one afternoon, unannounced. She stood in the doorway and looked around like she was measuring the room. You've been talking, she said. I've been answering, I replied. She crossed her arms. You're making it sound like we're bad people. I met her eyes. I'm making it sound like what happened. That's not the same, she said quickly. I felt a tight smile form. It is when the truth is involved. She shook her head. You always twist things. I stood up slowly. I twisted myself for years to make things easier for you. I'm done bending. Her face changed then. Not anger, something closer to fear. You don't know what you're doing, she said. I know exactly what I'm doing, I replied. I'm letting go of blame that was never mine. She left without another word. That evening, I pulled out an old box I had kept in the back of my closet. Inside were letters, cards, old school drawings, thank you notes from people outside my family, people I had helped, people who had seen me. I read one letter from a woman I once watched over during a hard time. It said, You saved me when you didn't have to. I held that paper and cried. Not because I needed praise, but because it reminded me that my children's story about me was not the only one. The next morning, Mrs. Coleman stopped me outside again. They're upset, she said. I know, I replied. She studied my face. You're not backing down, are you? No, I said. She nodded slowly. Good. That word stayed with me. Good. I had not heard that word connected to my choices in a long time. Later that day, my daughter sent a message. We need to talk as a family. I stared at it for a long time before replying. We already did, I typed. Now I'm listening. She did not answer. Instead, my son showed up that evening, standing on the porch with his hands in his pockets, like he didn't quite know what to do with them. You're tearing this family apart, he said the moment I opened the door. I looked at him calmly. No, I'm stopping myself from being used to hold it together. That's selfish, he snapped. I nodded. Maybe, but it's honest. He stepped closer. Why can't you just take responsibility like you always do? That sentence stopped me. Take responsibility. For everything. Always. I looked at him and felt something very clear rise in my chest. Because now I understood the real reason they blamed me. Blame made me predictable. Blame kept me apologizing. Blame kept me fixing what I didn't break. I took responsibility for raising you, I said quietly. I'm done taking responsibility for your choices. His face went pale. You don't mean that, he said. I do, I replied. He left without another word. That night, I wrote again in my notebook. I wrote not just what they said, but how I felt when they said it, how small I had been taught to feel, how much space I had given away. As I closed the notebook, my phone buzzed. A message from my daughter. If you keep this up, people will start believing you. I read it twice. Then I smiled. Because she had just told me everything. They were not afraid of the truth. They were afraid of it being believed. And in that moment, Sitting alone in my quiet house, I understood something that changed me forever. They blamed me for everything. Because if they did, they would have to face what they owed me. And that was a debt they were not ready to pay. I turned off my phone and leaned back in my chair. The storm was not over, but it had shifted. And soon, the weight they placed on me was going to land somewhere else. Before I continue this story, kindly subscribe, like, turn on the bell, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. The morning after that message, I woke up with a calm that scared me. Not the calm that comes from peace. The calm that comes when you finally stop hoping people will change. I made my bed neatly. I swept the floor. I washed the dishes that were already clean. I was not trying to be busy. I was grounding myself, reminding my body that I was safe, even if my heart still felt bruised. For years, my mornings had started with worry. Who would call? Who would need money? Who would be upset with me today? That morning, I realized something strange. I was no longer waiting for them. They were waiting for me. By mid-morning, the calls started. First, my daughter. I let it ring. Then my son. I let it ring too. Finally, a group message came through. We need to settle this today. Enough drama. Drama. That word made my chest tighten. When they blamed me in front of everyone, it was honesty. When I spoke my truth, it was drama. I put the phone down and went outside. The sun was warm. The air felt light. I sat on the porch and watched people pass, each carrying their own lives, their own problems. I wondered how many mothers were sitting somewhere right now, blaming themselves for things they did not break. An hour later, a car pulled up. Both my daughter and my son got out. Together. That was new. They walked toward the house like they had already decided how this would go. I did not rush to meet them. I stayed seated until they stood right in front of me. We need to talk, my daughter said. I nodded. Then talk. She frowned. Not like this. Like what? I asked. Like you're in control, she said. I almost smiled. We went inside and sat down. The room felt heavy, like the air knew something important was about to be said. My son spoke first. You've turned people against us. I shook my head slowly. I answered questions. You didn't have to say everything, my daughter snapped. I didn't, I replied. I said what was true. They exchanged looks. My daughter leaned forward. Why now, Mama? Why couldn't you just let things be? That question sat between us. Why couldn't I just stay quiet? Why couldn't I keep carrying it? Why couldn't I keep taking the blame? Because it was killing me. I let things be for decades, I said calmly, and it cost me myself. My son scoffed. You're acting like a victim. I looked at him. No, I'm acting like someone who finally stopped volunteering for pain. He opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. Because he didn't know how to argue with that. You raised us, my daughter said suddenly. So yes, some of this is on you. I nodded. I raised you to survive. What you chose to do after that belongs to you. Her eyes filled with frustration. You're rewriting history. No, I said softly. I'm remembering it. That was when my son said something that made my heart drop. If you keep this up, he said, don't expect us to be around. There it was. The threat I had been waiting for. Silence fell over the room. I felt my hands tremble, but I kept them folded in my lap. I already lost you, I said quietly, the day you blamed me and thanked me for nothing. My daughter's face crumpled for just a second before she hardened again. That's not fair, she said. Neither was my life, I replied, but I lived it anyway. They stood up together. We're done talking, my son said. I nodded. So am I. They walked out without looking back. The door closed. And this time, something inside me did not break. It settled. I sat there for a long time, listening to the quiet. The house felt different now. Not empty, honest. That evening, Mrs. Coleman came by and sat with me on the porch. They left angry, she said. I know, I replied. She studied me. You okay? I thought about it. I'm grieving, I said, but I'm not confused anymore. She nodded. That's a dangerous place to reach. I smiled faintly, only for people who benefited from my silence. Later that night, I opened my notebook again. I wrote one sentence at the top of the page. Blame is not truth, it is a tool. And then I began writing about all the times blame kept me quiet, all the times it stopped me from asking questions, all the times it made me apologize for existing. As I wrote, something became clear. They were not finished yet. People who lose control rarely walk away quietly. And I knew, deep in my bones, that the next move they made would not be about words. It would be about action. I closed the notebook and looked around my house. For the first time, I saw it not as the place where I stayed for everyone else, but as the place where I might finally stay for myself. Outside, a car drove past slowly. Too slowly. I watched it until it disappeared down the street. My heart beat a little faster, because something was coming, and whatever they planned next, it would force the truth into the open. Before I continue this story, kindly subscribe, like, turn on the bell, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. The next day, I noticed the car again. It passed my house slowly, just like the night before, not stopping, not speeding, just enough to be seen. I stood by the window and watched until it turned the corner. My chest tightened. People don't watch you like that for no reason. I told myself not to jump to conclusions, but my body already knew something my mind was still catching up to. For years, I had ignored that feeling, that quiet warning inside me. I ignored it because staying busy was easier than listening. Now I listened. That afternoon, I went through my house carefully, not cleaning, looking. I checked drawers, shelves, places my children had touched when they still lived here. I noticed things I hadn't before. A folder missing, a box moved slightly out of place, small signs that someone had been too comfortable in my space for too long. I felt a chill. Later, my phone rang. It was not my daughter, not my son. It was a number I did not recognize. I let it ring. Then it rang again. I answered. Mrs. Bellamy, a man's voice said calmly. I'm calling regarding some concerns. What concerns? I asked. About your well-being, he replied. That was the moment my heart dropped. My well-being is fine, I said slowly. He cleared his throat. There have been reports that you're under a lot of stress, that you may not be thinking clearly. Reports? I closed my eyes. Who made these reports? I asked. I can't share that, he said, but we'd like to set up a meeting, just to talk. Talk? That word again. The same word my children used right before blaming me. I'm not interested, I said. He paused. Mrs. Bellamy, this is for your own good. No, I replied. It's for someone else's comfort. The line went quiet. Then he said, we'll be in touch. The call ended. I stood there holding the phone, my hands shaking. They were taking it further. Blame was no longer enough. They were trying to make me look unfit, unstable, unreliable. I sat down slowly, my legs weak. For years, I had watched stories like this happen to other women, older women, women who stayed too long and then were told they didn't know their own minds anymore. I never thought it would be me. That evening, my daughter showed up again. She didn't come inside. She stood on the porch, arms crossed, eyes hard. Did someone call you today? She asked. I felt my heart pound, but I kept my voice calm. Yes. Her jaw tightened. Good. That one word told me everything. So this was your plan, I said quietly. Blame me, then question my mind. She looked away. We're worried about you. No, I said. You're worried about losing control. She stepped closer. You're making this worse than it needs to be." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not my little girl, but someone afraid of being exposed. "You thanked everyone but me," I said, "and now you want to take my voice too." She shook her head. "You're twisting things again." I felt something snap inside me, not anger, not fear. Clarity. "You blamed me for everything," I said, "so now I see what you're really afraid of." She frowned. "And what's that?" "That if people listen to me," I replied, "they'll start asking you questions." She didn't answer. She turned and walked away. That night, I didn't sleep much. I sat at my table with my notebook open, writing everything down. The calls, the car, the conversation, the words they used. I wrote until my hand cramped. Because one thing was clear now. They were building a story about me. And if I didn't speak first, their story would become the truth. As the sun began to rise, I closed my notebook and took a deep breath. I was no longer just defending myself. I was protecting my name. And I knew something important. The next step I took would decide whether I stayed silent forever, or whether the truth finally stepped into the light. And what I was about to do next, they would never forgive me for. That morning, I did not rush. I sat at the edge of my bed and prayed quietly, not for protection, not for forgiveness, but for steadiness. My hands still shook a little, but my thoughts were clear, clearer than they had ever been. They were trying to take my voice. And I finally understood why. Blame had worked for years. Silence had worked even longer. But now that I was speaking, they needed something stronger. They needed doubt. I dressed slowly and deliberately. Simple clothes, nothing dramatic, nothing that looked careless. I looked in the mirror and spoke out loud just to hear it. "My name is Eudora Bellamy. I know who I am." Hearing my own voice helped. I stepped outside and locked my door, sliding the key into my bag like it was something precious. The walk to the bus stop felt longer than usual, but I welcomed the time. It gave me space to think. I knew what I had to do. And I knew it would make them angry. At the bus stop, I saw the car again. Parked this time. My heart skipped. A man sat inside, pretending to look at his phone. He didn't get out, didn't wave, just watched. I turned away slowly and boarded the bus. I did not look back. The place I went was quiet, neutral, the kind of building people walk into when something serious needs to be said. The walls were plain. The chairs were hard, no warmth, no comfort. But clarity lived there. I sat across from a woman who spoke gently but firmly. She asked questions. I answered honestly. I told her everything, not with emotion, not with accusation, but with facts. Who called? What was said? What papers existed? What had changed? She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she nodded slowly. "I'm glad you came in yourself," she said. "That matters." Those words stayed with me. It matters that I came myself. That afternoon, my phone exploded with missed calls. My daughter. My son. Unknown numbers. I didn't answer. I went home and locked my door. An hour later, there was knocking. Hard knocking. I opened the door, just enough to see my son's face twisted in anger. "What did you do?" he demanded. "I told the truth," I said. "You didn't have to go that far," he snapped. "I didn't go far," I replied. "I stood still." He laughed bitterly. "You're trying to destroy us." I looked at him calmly. "You're afraid of being seen." My daughter appeared behind him, her face pale. "You made us look bad," she said. "No," I replied. "I made myself visible." She stepped forward. "Why are you doing this to us?" That question hurt more than anything else. "Because you did it to me first," I said quietly. They stared at me like they didn't recognize the woman standing in front of them. And in a way, they didn't. Because I was no longer carrying their blame. "You should have just stayed quiet," my son said. I nodded. "That's what you needed." They left without another word. That evening, Mrs. Coleman came by again. "They're upset," she said. "I know," I replied. She studied me closely. "You sure you're ready for what comes next?" I thought about the years of blame, the years of silence, the way they thanked everyone but me. "I've been ready my whole life," I said. "I just didn't know it." That night, I received a message. Not a threat. A warning. "This will get ugly." I stared at the screen and felt something settle deep inside me. Because ugly had never scared me. I survived ugly. I raised children inside ugly. Ugly had never stopped me before. I turned off my phone and sat in the quiet. They blamed me for everything. And now, with the truth rising, they were running out of places to hide. Because once doubt fails, only the truth remains. And it was getting louder. The warning stayed in my mind all night. This will get ugly. I had heard worse in my life. I lay in bed listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of cars passing, the house settling the way old houses do. Every sound felt sharper now, like my senses had finally woken up after years of sleep. Ugly never scared me. What scared me was disappearing. That morning, I woke up with a heaviness in my chest, but my thoughts were steady. I moved through my routine slowly, carefully. I made breakfast. I cleaned the kitchen. I folded laundry that had already been folded once, not because it needed doing, but because my hands needed something calm to hold on to. Around mid-morning, there was a knock at my door. Not hard. Not soft. Careful. I peered through the window and saw two people standing on my porch, a woman holding a clipboard and a man standing slightly behind her, both dressed neatly, both serious. My heart began to race. This was it. I opened the door. "Mrs. Bellamy," the woman said gently, "we'd like to talk with you for a moment." I stepped aside and let them in. They sat at my table, the same table where my children once sat and blamed me for their lives. The woman smiled politely, but her eyes were sharp. The man said very little, mostly writing things down. "We're here because of some concerns that were raised," the woman said. "I expected that," I replied. She nodded. "We just want to check on you, make sure everything is okay." Everything. That word felt almost funny. "I'm fine," I said, "but I know why you're really here." She raised her eyebrows slightly. "And why is that?" "Because someone told you I wasn't," I replied. There was a pause. She glanced at her clipboard. "There have been reports that you're confused, that you're under stress, that family members are worried." I leaned back in my chair and folded my hands in my lap. "I am under stress," I said calmly, "because my children blamed me for everything they didn't want to take responsibility for. That does not make me confused." The man writing notes stopped for a moment and looked up. The woman nodded slowly. "Can you tell us what's been happening?" And so I did. I spoke clearly. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. I did not defend myself like I used to. I simply explained. The blame, the meeting, the letter, the calls, the pressure, the sudden concern about my mind only after I spoke up. I showed them my notebook. Dates. Times. Exact words. The woman read silently for a long time. When she finally looked up, her expression had changed. "You've been keeping records," she said. "Yes," I replied, "because I was taught that when people want to rewrite you, memory becomes dangerous." She nodded slowly. The visit ended politely. No threats, no promises, just quiet seriousness. When they left, my legs felt weak, but I did not sit down right away. I stood in my kitchen and took a deep breath. They had tried to paint me as unstable. Instead, they found me prepared. That afternoon, my phone rang again. My daughter. I answered. "What did you tell them?" she asked sharply. "The truth," I said. "You didn't have to say all that," she snapped. "I did," I replied, "because you said it first, just not to me." She went quiet. "You're making us look cruel," she said finally. I felt my chest tighten. You did that yourselves. She hung up. An hour later, my son texted. You've crossed a line. I stared at the message for a long time before replying. You crossed it when you blamed me for everything and thanked me for nothing. There was no response. That evening, Mrs. Coleman came by again. She looked worried. They were asking questions around the neighborhood, she said. About you. Let them, I replied. She studied my face. You're not afraid. I thought about it. I am, I said honestly, but I'm more afraid of going quiet again. She nodded slowly. That makes sense. Later that night, as I sat alone, something heavy settled in my chest. Not fear. Grief. Grief for the children I thought I had. Grief for the years I spent believing blame was something I deserved. Grief for the version of myself that never asked for credit, never asked to be seen. I cried then. Not loud. Not broken. Just tears sliding down my face as I let myself feel what I had buried for too long. When the tears stopped, I felt empty. And then, clear. Because I realized something important. They didn't just blame me. They built their lives on my silence. And now that silence was gone, the next move would not be gentle. They would not apologize. They would not suddenly understand. They would protect themselves. At any cost. I turned off the lights and went to bed, my notebook beside me. Because tomorrow, I knew they would try something new. Something bolder. Something meant to scare me back into place. And I also knew this. I would not move. I woke up before the sun. The house was still dark, but my mind was already awake. I lay there listening to my own breathing, feeling my heart beat slow and steady. I knew something was coming, not because anyone told me, but because silence like this never lasts. I got out of bed and made myself tea. As the water boiled, I stared at the wall and thought about how many mornings I had started this way, worried about everyone else. This morning felt different. This morning, I was worried about me. Around mid-morning, the phone rang. It was my son. I let it ring once. Twice. Then I answered. Mama, he said, his voice calm in a way that made my stomach tighten. We need to talk today. I'm listening, I replied. Not like this, he said. We need to meet somewhere neutral. Neutral. That word again. I'm not going anywhere, I said. You can say what you need to say. There was a pause, then he sighed. Fine, he said. Then I'll just tell you. I waited. There's been a decision, he continued, for everyone's peace. My hand tightened around the phone. What decision? I asked. He hesitated, just for a moment too long. We think it's best if someone else helps manage things for you. Things like what? I asked. Your finances, your house, your day-to-day life, he said quickly. Just until everything settles. My chest burned. So you're taking over, I said. No, he replied. We're helping. Helping. I closed my eyes. You blamed me for everything, I said, and now you want to thank yourselves for fixing me. That's not fair, he snapped. You said fairness didn't matter when you blamed me, I replied. He ended the call. Less than an hour later, there was a knock at my door. I already knew who it was. I opened it slowly. My daughter stood there, holding a folder. Her face was tight, controlled, like she was afraid something might spill out if she relaxed. We need you to look at something, she said. I did not move aside. Say it here, I replied. She sighed. Mama, please don't make this harder. I looked at the folder in her hands. What is that? Just documents, she said, so we can help you. I shook my head slowly. You blamed me, you questioned my mind, and now you want my signature. Her eyes flashed. You're being dramatic. No, I said, I'm being careful. She stepped closer. If you don't cooperate, people will think you're refusing help. There it was. The trap. I felt my heart pounding, but my voice stayed steady. Let them think, I said. She stared at me, shocked. You don't understand how this looks. I understand exactly, I replied. You're trying to make me look difficult so you can look reasonable. Her face hardened. You always have to make yourself the victim, she said. I felt something deep inside me settle. No, I said quietly. You made me the excuse. She turned and walked away without another word. That afternoon, I sat at my table and opened my notebook again. I wrote down everything. The call, the folder, the words they used. As I wrote, a thought came to me that made my chest feel tight. They weren't acting alone. Someone had advised them. Someone had told them what words to use, what steps to take, how to push without leaving marks. And that meant this wasn't over. As evening came, my phone buzzed again. A message from a number I didn't know. You should reconsider. This can still end quietly. Quietly. I stared at the screen for a long time. Quiet was how they blamed me. Quiet was how they took credit. Quiet was how they tried to take control. I typed back one sentence. I've been quiet my whole life. There was no reply. I stood up and walked through my house, touching the walls, the door frames, the table. This place still knew me. It still held my years, my work, my staying. Outside, a car slowed near my house again. I watched from the window as it paused, then drove on. My heart beat faster, because now I knew for sure. They were not done. And whatever they planned next would not be polite. It would not be careful. It would be meant to end this. I closed my curtains and turned off the lights. Tomorrow would decide everything. And I had no idea which side they were willing to cross next. The night before everything changed, I barely slept. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet, knowing it was not peace. It was the kind of quiet that comes right before something breaks. My body felt tired, but my mind would not slow down. Every word they had said replayed itself in my head, lining up like proof. By morning, I knew one thing for sure. They were going to make a move. I woke up early and dressed carefully, not to look impressive, not to look weak, just to look like myself. I made breakfast and ate it slowly, forcing myself not to rush. I wanted my body to remember this feeling, being present in my own life. Around mid-morning, the knock came. 3 sharp knocks. I did not jump. I did not panic. I stood up and walked to the door. When I opened it, my heart dropped anyway. My daughter stood there, my son beside her, and behind them were 2 strangers. One man, one woman, both serious, both holding folders. This won't take long, the woman said gently. I stepped aside and let them in. They sat in my living room like they had every right to be there. My children stood close together, arms crossed, faces tight with control. Not guilt, control. The woman cleared her throat. We're here because there are concerns about your well-being, she said. I nodded. I know. She looked surprised. You do? Yes, I replied. My children told you. My daughter opened her mouth, but I kept speaking. They blamed me for everything that went wrong in their lives, I said calmly. Then they told people I wasn't thinking clearly, that I needed help, that I couldn't manage on my own. The woman looked down at her papers. I reached for my notebook. I wrote everything down, I said. Dates, words, calls, visits. I placed it on the table. The man flipped through it slowly. My son shifted uncomfortably. The woman looked up. Mrs. Bellamy, can you tell us how you're feeling today? I feel clear, I said. I feel hurt, and I feel done being blamed so others don't have to take responsibility. There was a long silence. Then the man closed the notebook. I don't see confusion here, he said quietly. My daughter's head snapped up, but she's organized, he continued. She's aware, she's consistent. The woman nodded. We don't see grounds to move forward. My chest tightened, but I stayed calm. So that's it, my son asked. For now, the woman replied. Yes, They stood and left politely. The door closed. And suddenly, it was just us. My children and me. The air felt thick. "You embarrassed us," my daughter said through clenched teeth. I looked at her. "You tried to erase me." My son shook his head. "You didn't have to do all this." "Yes," I said softly, "I did." Silence stretched between us. Then I said the words I had been holding back for years. "You blamed me for everything and thanked me for nothing, but I see now why." They did not answer. "Because if you thanked me," I continued, "you would have to admit what you took." My daughter's eyes filled with tears, not regret but frustration. "We're done here," my son said. They left without another word. This time, I did not follow them to the door. I sat down slowly and let the quiet settle. It did not feel empty. It felt honest. Later that evening, Mrs. Coleman came by. "They leave?" she asked. "Yes," I replied. She smiled gently. "You look lighter." "I feel finished," I said. That night, I stood in my living room and looked around. This house had seen my worst days and my strongest ones. I touched the wall and whispered, "I stayed." I stayed when it hurt. I stayed when I was blamed. I stayed when no one said thank you. But staying taught me something important. Staying showed me exactly who I was carrying. And when I finally put that weight down, I learned how strong I really was. They blamed me for everything. They thanked me for nothing. And that's when I finally understood. I didn't need their thanks to know my worth. If this story touched you, please subscribe, like, and turn on the notification bell for more emotional stories like this. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Somewhere out there, I might be reading.